August 2nd, 216 BC, 3 p.m. A Roman foot soldier finds himself amidst a blood-drenched field in southern Italy. He's unable to move his arms, not merely due to his injuries or the sheer exhaustion, despite suffering from both. The impossibility stems from the immense density of approximately 70,000 men packed so tightly around him that any arm movement is physically obstructed. He senses the breath of the man behind him on his neck, and catches the scent of the individual in front. A potent mix of blood, sweat, urine, and terror. When that man suddenly collapses, pierced through the throat by a Carthaginian spear, he doesn't fall to the ground. He can't. The surrounding mass of bodies props him up, his dead eyes still open, blood trickling onto his Roman sandals. Ahead, Carthaginian infantry advance relentlessly, systematically thrusting their weapons. On his sides, African forces squeeze inward like the closing jaws of a colossal beast. Behind him, enemy cavalry impale any remaining survivors. He is already dead, though he hasn't yet realized it. In the subsequent 2 hours, this battleground will claim the lives of 50,000 Romans. That equates to 100 casualties every single minute. 100 fathers, brothers, and sons per 60 seconds. If one counts with me, 1,001, that's 7 dead. 1,002, another 7 perished. 1,003, a further 7 gone. This is Cannae, often described as the quintessential battle, the ultimate carnage. And it brought Rome to the brink of destruction. The reason this battle continues to haunt military leaders, from Napoleon to Eisenhower, is profound. The Romans had ample warning. They possessed every indication of impending disaster. A general even pleaded with them to abstain from engaging. Despite commanding 86,000 troops, nearly double Hannibal's force, they marched directly into a trap so perfectly conceived and executed that military academies still analyze it 2,200 years later. This is the account of how one man orchestrated the most brilliant tactical achievement in military history, and how his adversaries staunchly refused to yield. To grasp how 50,000 men could perish in a single afternoon, we must rewind 2 years to the genesis of Rome's torment. 218 BC. Rome and Carthage, 2 formidable powers, were embroiled in a life-or-death struggle. They had previously fought the First Punic War, from 264 to 241 BC, which Rome narrowly won, imposing severe war reparations on Carthage, stripping them of Sicily and publicly humiliating them. For 2 decades, Carthage brooded, meticulously planning its retaliation. Then emerged 29-year-old Hannibal Barca, son of Hamilcar Barca, the most distinguished Carthaginian general of the preceding conflict. Legend has it that at the age of 9, Hannibal's father made him swear eternal enmity towards Rome over an altar, his small hand placed upon a sacrificial animal. Regardless of its veracity, by 218 BC, Hannibal had spent a decade forging a new Carthaginian dominion in Spain. He was exceptionally brilliant, utterly ruthless, unpredictable, and completely disinclined to engage in the type of warfare Rome anticipated. Rome expected him to fight in Spain or perhaps sail to Sicily, standard military protocol. Instead, Hannibal accomplished something considered utterly impossible by everyone. He led 50,000 men and 37 war elephants across the Alps in winter, losing half his army to cold, avalanches, and starvation. He descended into northern Italy like a nightmare made manifest, albeit with 26,000 survivors and perhaps a dozen elephants still alive. The Romans were incredulous. Yet he had done it. And now he was in Italy, devastating their farms, slaughtering their populace, performing precisely the actions they had inflicted upon others for 200 years. Rome dispatched an army to confront him. At the Battle of Trebia in December 218 BC, Hannibal lured them across an icy river at dawn, where they were exhausted and freezing, then ambushed them with his cavalry and remaining elephants crashing into their flanks. 20,000 Romans perished, and the consul barely escaped. 6 months later, in June 217 BC, at Lake Trasimene, in what remains one of the largest ambushes in military history, Hannibal concealed his entire army in the hills surrounding the lake. The Romans marched into the valley in a morning fog, unable to see 10 feet ahead. Suddenly, Carthaginians swarmed everywhere, descending from the hills, trapping the Romans between the enemy and the water. 15,000 were killed outright, and another 15,000 were captured. Consul Flaminius died fighting. The bodies in the lake were reportedly so numerous that, according to Polybius, the water ran red for days. Rome was gripped by terror. This man, this outsider, was achieving the impossible, winning where he shouldn't, killing Romans on their own soil. So, they did something Rome almost never did. They appointed a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus. Fabius adopted a clear strategy: avoid fighting Hannibal, evade direct confrontation, sever his supply lines, shadow his army, but never engage. Allow Italy's summer heat, lack of provisions, and isolation to defeat him. Outweigh him. It was a brilliant, patient approach, precisely what Rome required. And the Romans absolutely abhorred it. Roman culture was founded on military glory, on meeting the enemy in open battle, on overwhelming them with superior numbers and discipline. Fabius's strategy felt like an act of cowardice. Hannibal conducted incursions across the rural regions, torching farms, absconding with livestock, and subjecting Rome to ignominy, all while Fabius remained a passive observer. He followed at a distance, steadfastly declining engagement. They branded him Cunctator, the dawdler, a label devoid of praise. This pattern persisted for months. Hannibal operated unrestricted, while Fabius hovered close by, a vigilant phantom. With each passing day of inaction, Rome's disgrace deepened. The populace clamored for retribution. The Senate demanded triumph. Fabius's time was running out. Then, in the spring of 216 BC, Hannibal seized control of the grain storage at Cannae, a small fortified town in southern Italy that served as a food hub for the entire area. Suddenly, Rome could no longer disregard his presence. Losing Cannae meant jeopardizing their provisions, appearing feeble to their allies, and conceding that this foreign general could simply appropriate anything he desired from their territory. A response was imperative. They had to fight, precisely Hannibal's objective. The 216 BC elections saw Rome seeking leaders inclined to combat. They acquired 2 individuals who harbored mutual disdain. Enter Gaius Terentius Varro, the offspring of a butcher, who as a youth toiled in his father's shop, carving meat and dealing with blood and offal. Upon his father's demise, Varro utilized his inheritance to stake everything on a political career. He prosecuted aristocrats for malfeasance, incurring formidable enmities, yet endeared himself to the common populace. He cultivated his notoriety by assailing the elite, advocating for decisive action over prudence. He was a popular hero. His campaign pledges in 216 BC were straightforward. "Grant me an army, and I shall crush Hannibal the moment I encounter him. No more evasiveness, no more cowardice. We possess a 2-to-1 numerical advantage. How can we possibly fail?" The public resonated with this sentiment. The plebeian assembly elected him overwhelmingly. Here was a man who comprehended their frustration, who vowed to conclude this humiliating conflict with one conclusive confrontation. There was merely one complication. Varro had never commanded in a significant battle. He exuded overconfidence, aggressiveness, and was convinced that Rome's numerical superiority guaranteed an effortless victory. This might have been effective against an ordinary adversary, but Hannibal was anything but ordinary. Now consider Lucius Aemilius Paulus, his complete antithesis. A patrician of noble lineage, his father had served as consul in 255 BC. Paulus himself had already held the consulship in 219 BC, having vanquished foes in the Illyrian War and been honored with a triumphal procession through Rome's thoroughfares. He comprehended the weight of command and the price of war. He had meticulously studied Hannibal's previous triumphs and grasped the caliber of tactical genius they confronted. However, Paullus also faced a formidable challenge. The Senate, desperate for resolution, had mandated that he share command with Varro. Moreover, Rome upheld a tradition where two consuls alternated command on a daily basis. One day, Varro would lead the army, the next, Paullus. This back and forth was democracy in practice and a recipe for catastrophe. The evening before assuming command, Fabius held a private meeting with Paullus. Their conversation was chronicled by numerous historians. Fabius stated, "Lucius, I understand my purpose here. If neither consul possessed sound judgment, I would not trouble myself to speak, for it would be a futile endeavor. If both possessed sound judgment, I would have no need to speak, for they would know what to do. But one consul possesses sound judgment, and the other does not. Therefore, I address the one who does." Paullus realized he was in a quandary. He articulated the strategic reality. Hannibal finds no peace by either land or sea. No cities welcome him. He holds nothing he can call his own. He sustains himself daily through plunder. He commands barely a third of the army he brought across the mountains. Famine claims more lives than our swords. If we simply bide our time, he will self-destruct. Yet, Fabius's plea was disregarded in the Senate. The populace yearned for battle. Varro promised battle, and democracy granted him precisely what he desired: leadership of 8 legions, the largest army Rome had ever deployed, 86,000 men, a combined force of Romans and Italian allies, an overwhelming power. The Senate's directives were explicit: locate Hannibal and annihilate him. Paullus confided in his staff, early July 216 BC. This immense Roman army advanced southward through the scorching Italian summer, each soldier burdened with 50 pounds of equipment, reaching the region surrounding Cannae within 2 days. When their scouts detected Hannibal's encampment, confidence surged. "We outnumber them 2-1. This will be effortless." Meanwhile, Hannibal observed their approach. An officer apprehensively noted their numbers. Hannibal delivered his renowned reply, recorded by Polybius, who interviewed survivors. He smiled and remarked, "There is one thing, Gisco, yet more astonishing, of which you take no notice." "What is that, my lord?" "Among all those vast numbers before us, there is not one man named Gisco." Laughter rippled through the Carthaginian ranks, but after the jest, Hannibal grew serious. He informed his inner circle, "They bring me precisely what I require. Numbers so vast they can barely maneuver. Their arrogance blinds them," he confided to his inner circle, "and with 2 leaders at odds with each other, they are delivering exactly what I desire. An army so vast it's practically immobilized. Tomorrow we will tempt them to strike first. On the ground I've selected, at my chosen moment, we shall utterly destroy them." By July 31st, the Roman forces had arrived at the Aufidus River, establishing a camp 5 miles from Hannibal's position. Both armies could observe each other's campfires during the night, with the impending clash just 2 days away. However, within that 48-hour period, an event occurred that ensured Rome's ultimate downfall. On August 1st, command rotated to Paullus. He was a cautious leader, meticulously examining the terrain and expressing hesitation. He preferred to delay the engagement until a more advantageous battleground could be secured. Yet August 2nd belonged to Varro. On the evening of July 31st, the Roman encampment stretched across both banks of the Aufidus River. The primary camp was situated on the north bank, roughly 5 miles from Hannibal's forces. This presented a logistical challenge. The distance from a water source was too great. Consequently, the Romans established a smaller auxiliary camp on the south bank, nearer to the river. This division, though tactically disadvantageous, was deemed essential. Inside the command tent, Paullus unrolled maps across the table. He had devoted the afternoon to analyzing the topography, and what he observed caused him profound alarm. Quote 16. Paullus noted, tracing a line across the plain with his finger. Quote 17. Varro dismissed his concerns with a dismissive gesture. Quote 18. Quote 19. Paullus countered, pointing to the map. A youthful and eager junior tribune began to speak. Paullus abruptly interrupted him. He slammed his hand on the table. Varro rose, his voice resonating beyond the tent, loud enough for nearby soldiers to overhear. Quote 24 ______. The junior officers murmured their agreement, while the veterans remained silent, haunted by memories of previous defeats. A vote was taken. The attack was postponed, solely because the following day was still Paullus's turn in command. The day after, Varro would finally have his requested battle. That night, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry, led by Hannibal, launched a raid on the smaller Roman camp. They targeted water carriers, harassed the sentries, and robbed the Romans of their sleep. This was a deliberate act of psychological warfare, keeping them anxious, thirsty, and resentful of the delay. It proved effective. Varro moved through the camp that evening, speaking just loudly enough for the soldiers to hear. If I were in charge tomorrow, we would already be fighting. But no, we wait while they consume our water, incinerate our supplies, and mock our cowardice. The soldiers muttered their agreement. Why were they waiting? They possessed superior numbers, superior strength. Let's bring an end to this, they thought. Late that night, alone in his tent, Paullus composed a letter to his son, a common practice among Roman commanders before significant engagements. He wrote, "Should I fall tomorrow, understand that I died upholding what honor demanded, even when prudence suggested otherwise. Your grandfather perished in battle. I too will likely meet a similar fate. But teach your sons this: there is a distinction between bravery and foolishness. Sometimes the most courageous act is to exercise patience." He sealed the letter and entrusted it to an aide. "Deliver this if I do not return." The aide hesitated. "Sir, do you believe—" "I believe Hannibal is the most formidable man alive," Paullus interrupted, "and tomorrow is Varro's day to lead." While the Romans debated, Hannibal laid his plans. What he was preparing to execute had never been attempted on such a scale or with such precision. Traditional ancient warfare was straightforward. Two infantry lines would collide, pushing and shoving until the larger force typically prevailed. It was brutal, predictable, and bloody. Hannibal envisioned a radical departure. On the morning of August 1st, Hannibal assembled his senior commanders. Using rocks and sand, he demonstrated his strategy, drawing formations on the ground. "The Romans will advance with their full strength," he explained, 70,000 heavy infantry, all charging into our center. An officer nodded. This was the typical Roman approach. "Conventional wisdom dictates placing your strongest troops in the center to meet them," Hannibal continued, then paused. "We will do the opposite." A stunned silence filled the tent. He then drew a curved line in the sand. "Our center, composed of Gauls and Spanish, will advance in a crescent shape, convex towards the enemy." He illustrated the Roman advance pushing into it. "As they push, our center will slowly and deliberately retreat. The crescent will invert, transforming from convex to concave. The Romans will plunge deeper and deeper into a pocket." "But my lord," an officer protested, "that will weaken our center. They will break through." "Precisely," Hannibal responded. "They will believe they are winning." A glimmer entered Hannibal's gaze. Quote 41, he explained. Quote 42. One officer's expression shifted as understanding dawned. "And our cavalry," Hannibal continued, "the left wing, comprising 6,000 Spanish and Gallic heavy horsemen under Hasdrubal, will confront the Roman right cavalry by the river. We outnumber them 2-1. Hasdrubal's orders are to decimate them swiftly." He paused for emphasis. "But, and this is crucial, do not pursue. Reform, then ride across the entire battlefield to assault their left cavalry from the rear." He then pointed to his right wing. "Our Numidians, 4,000 light horsemen led by Hanno and Hannibal, will face 4,800 Roman allies. They are outnumbered. Their purpose isn't victory, nor is it defeat. It's to tie the enemy down, harass, skirmish, and consume their time. When Hasdrubal arrives from behind, both Roman cavalry wings will break. Hannibal then made a sweeping gesture, illustrating the culmination of his strategy. All our cavalry will strike their infantry from the rear, while the African infantry crushes them from the flanks, and our center holds them steadfastly in front. A profound silence descended. Then an experienced commander cautiously remarked, "My lord, the timing would have to be impeccable." Hannibal nodded, "I know, and if even one component fails, we all perish." The sheer brilliance of the scheme was almost unsettling. Hannibal wasn't merely aiming to defeat the Romans. He intended to ensnare them, to wield their own strengths, their numerical superiority, their aggressive momentum, their dense formations against them. He sought to transform their advantage into a snare. He elucidated the psychological aspect, quote 50. He concluded, quote 51. An officer finished his thought, quote, Hannibal refined it. Individual instructions followed, meticulously documented by numerous ancient chroniclers, compiled from the testimonies of survivors. Hannibal held a private meeting with Hasdrubal, commander of the Spanish and Gallic heavy cavalry, quote 54. Hasdrubal posed the obvious query, quote 55. Quote, to Hanno and Maharbal, commanding the Numidian cavalry, he stated, quote 56. Quote, to the African infantry commanders, quote 57. Quote, and to the Gallic and Spanish soldiers at the center, a message tinged with emotion. For these men would endure the most hardship. Quote 58. He paused, his gaze sweeping over their faces. Quote 59. He then made a solemn vow. Quote 60. The strategy was laid out, but its success hinged on a single crucial element, provoking a Roman attack. For this, Hannibal needed Varro in command. Dawn broke on August 1st, Paullus's day for command. Perhaps Rome's final opportunity. Paullus ordered a cautious deployment. Quote, _61 ______. The experienced soldiers approved, while the eager younger recruits grumbled. Quote, 62. Quote, Varro publicly voiced his exasperation, loud enough for the troops to hear. Quote, 63. Quote, soldiers muttered in agreement. Paullus attempted to reason with him privately. Varro retorted. Paullus replied softly. By midday, Hannibal dispatched a small cavalry contingent forward, a provocative raid, just enough to pose a threat, not enough to commit fully. Varro demanded permission to retaliate. Political pressure compelled Paullus to concur. Varro guided the Roman cavalry forth, leading to a minor altercation. The Roman contingent managed to repel their Carthaginian adversaries, sustaining minimal casualties. Returning triumphant, Varro addressed his troops. Quote, 67, he declared. Quote, 68, the soldiers were convinced. Hannibal was not invincible. Varro was courageous, and Paullus was a coward. They believed that on the morrow, Varro's day, they would bring the conflict to a decisive end. That evening, during the final war council, Paullus made one last attempt to sway decisions. He laid out the maps, urging, examine the terrain closely. See the river on our right flank? If we deploy there, half our army will be unable to maneuver. We will be forced into a narrow, deep formation, not a wide one. The plain is flat, ideal for cavalry. They possess 10,000 horsemen, we have 6,000. Their cavalry is superiorly trained. Tomorrow the wind will gust from the south, meaning dust will blind us. This is precisely the kind of battle Hannibal desires. Varro rose in response. You are merely listing excuses, he retorted. I perceive opportunities. Yes, we will be compressed, which means our thrust will be more potent. Yes, they have cavalry, and we have legions. Yet cavalry cannot shatter organized legionaries. Tomorrow is my day to command, and tomorrow we fight. The officers cast their votes by standing, with the majority siding with Varro. Only the seasoned veterans remained seated with Paullus. Democracy, it seems, has chosen calamity, Paullus mused to himself. Tomorrow we shall grant them all their. Tomorrow we shall grant them all their wishes. The guard began to protest, but Paullus cut him off. No, there is no time. We are committed. The men would mutiny if we retreated. Our allies would deem us cowardly. Hannibal would pursue us relentlessly should we flee. So, we fight. We fight with every ounce of our being. And we pray that courage can triumph over folly. In the Carthaginian encampment, scouts reported, the Romans are preparing for a full deployment at dawn. It is Varro's day. Indeed? Hannibal inquired. Yes, Lord, perfect. He then addressed his officers. Rest now. Tomorrow we shall forge history. The ultimate night descended upon both military camps. Within the Roman lines, 86,000 men, mostly thrilled and eager, prepared themselves. The veterans, however, were subdued and pensive. They meticulously inspected their gear, sharpened their swords, polished their armor, and penned letters home, many for the last time. In the Carthaginian camp, 50,000 men, though apprehensive, radiated confidence. They had unwavering faith in Hannibal, having never witnessed his defeat. They reconfirmed their positions, reviewed signals, and rehearsed their maneuvering drills one final time. On one side stood the largest army Rome had ever assembled, confident and enthusiastic, outnumbering their adversary by 2 to 1. On the other, a smaller force, but led by a commander who had never tasted defeat. As both armies slept, the critical pieces were meticulously positioned. The trap was meticulously set. In a mere 12 hours, it would be sprung. Dawn, August 2nd, 216 BC. The morning Rome suffered the loss of 50,000 men. The sun ascended above the Aufidus River, already blazing. It was August in southern Italy, and the temperature was predicted to surpass 90 degrees Fahrenheit. A wind began to stir from the south, the Levecci, a seasonal gust that carried dust and grit. Anyone who has experienced sand striking their face understands its blinding effect. Now, imagine attempting to fight in formation with a constant stream of dust assaulting your eyes. Both armies awakened early. In the Roman encampment, trumpets sounded at dawn, rousing 86,000 men. They consumed a quick breakfast of porridge and water. Then commenced the lengthy process of donning armor. 50 pounds of metal and leather, a helmet, a bronze cuirass guarding the chest, greaves on the legs, the large rectangular shield known as the scutum, a short sword, the gladius, and 2 heavy javelins, the pilum. Each man bore the weight of civilization on his shoulders. Rome's might manifested in bronze and iron. Formation by units, legion by legion, with allied contingents joining in. The sheer logistical feat of mobilizing 86,000 men consumed over an hour. Officers bellowed commands, and dust was already swirling from the thousands of marching feet. In the Carthaginian camp, the atmosphere was calmer, more disciplined. The seasoned troops understood the routine. They performed a final check of their equipment. Officers reiterated the plan. Everyone knew their designated role and what needed to be accomplished. Hannibal initiated the movement, leading his army southward, crossing the Aufidus River, and establishing position on the flat terrain south of the river. His army faced north. This decision was pivotal. The wind at their backs, the sun not in their eyes, their left flank anchored by the river, and the right flank presenting open ground. It was a perfectly chosen strategic position. The Romans followed around 8 a.m. Varro issued the command, quote, 78. The 86,000 men crossing the river took over an hour, generating dust clouds visible for miles. The clanking of armor and the echoing shouts of officers permeated the air. For their formation, the right wing, comprising 1,600 Roman citizen cavalry, was positioned near the river under the command of Consul Paullus. The center consisted of 70,000 heavy infantry, their primary strength, packed into a deep formation with ranks extending 50 or 60 men deep. The left wing featured 4,800 allied cavalry, situated far from the river. Astoundingly, Varro had made his infantry formation so deep, with so many ranks, that its front was almost square, its width nearly equal to its depth. Despite possessing 86,000 men, his battle line barely exceeded the width of Hannibal's 50,000 strong force. The numerous additional soldiers packed in the lines behind exerted pressure from the rear, unable to engage, unable to retreat, and unable to perform any action other than adding weight to the forward thrust. This was precisely what Hannibal desired. By 10 a.m., both armies were fully arrayed. From the Roman viewpoint, the Carthaginian line appeared diminutive, with its center bulging forward in an odd crescent shape, seemingly vulnerable. Roman officers scoffed, believing the Carthaginians had deployed incorrectly and were exposing their center. Conversely, from the Carthaginian perspective, the immense Roman force resembled a human avalanche, yet it was compressed, dense, and incapable of flexible movement, exactly as Hannibal had anticipated. At 10:30, a tense stillness preceded the impending conflict. A vast assembly of 136,000 men occupied a single field of his lines, proclaiming, "Today you of his lines, proclaiming, today you witness the largest army Rome has ever assembled. They believe numbers guarantee victory. Show them what true warriors can achieve." Varro rallied his soldiers, urging them, "Remember, you fight for Rome, for your loved ones, for glory. When you breach their center, do not falter. Push through. Victory is ours." Paullus remained silent, offering only a prayer to Mars, for he foresaw the grim reality. At 10:30, trumpets blared, signaling the commencement of the Battle of Cannae. The initial engagement involved the youngest soldiers, the expendables, Roman velites, light infantry aged 18 to 20, who dashed forward, lightly armored and armed with javelins. Their role was to harass the adversary before the primary confrontation. Carthaginian light infantry countered with Balearic slingers, renowned and lethal, and quick, seasoned North African javelin throwers. The skirmish was brief and brutal. Hundreds of javelins crisscrossed the air, while slingstones, moving faster than bullets, struck shields and skulls. Men screamed and fell, their blood staining the dust. In ancient warfare, this was the customary beginning of battles. Light troops screening the main forces, probing enemy reactions, a form of psychological warfare. After 10 minutes, the light troops withdrew through openings in the infantry lines, which were immediately sealed. Now, the main armies confronted each other at a distance of less than 200 yards, close enough to discern individual faces, hear distinct shouts, and catch the pungent odor of sweat emanating from thousands of men in bronze armor under the August sun. The dust grew thicker. The wind from the south intensified, a typical feature of a dry Italian summer, as thousands of feet churned the earth. Clouds of dust rose and blew directly into the Romans' eyes. Roman soldiers squinted, constantly blinking. Quote 82 one complained. Quote 83 an officer bellowed. Quote 84. This was the final opportunity to disengage. Both armies could still have pulled back without shame for repositioning. However, neither side would. The Romans were confident. The Carthaginians also exuded confidence, observing a formation precisely as their general had predicted. At 10:45 a.m., Varro gave the command to advance. 70,000 men began to march forward. Imagine the sound, the spectacle, armor clanking in unison, boots pounding the ground, creating a rhythmic thud that vibrated in one's chest. The earth trembled. A human wall, 86,000 strong, surged forward like a metallic tsunami. Men in the rear ranks could not even see the enemy. They simply pushed the man in front. From the Carthaginian viewpoint, it was as if death itself was approaching, unstoppable, inescapable. Yet, Hannibal had witnessed this before at Trebia, at Lake Trasimene. He understood precisely how the Romans fought, and he was poised to exploit that knowledge against them. By 11 a.m., while the infantry moved closer, the cavalry engagements became decisive. On the left flank, the Carthaginian left and Roman right, near the river, the heavy cavalry clashed. Hasdrubal commanded 6,000 to 7,000 Spanish and Gallic heavy cavalry. Opposing them were 1,600 Roman citizen cavalry, led by Consul Paullus, outnumbered at least 4-1, possibly more severely. The terrain was crucial, a narrow strip between the river and the infantry, preventing wide maneuvers and forcing close-quarters combat. Brutal, personal. Hasdrubal did not hesitate. At 11:05, he ordered the advance. The Spanish cavalry struck with force. Heavy horses, men armed with swords and spears, experienced fighters, many veterans of years in Spain. The Roman cavalry attempted to form up, but the confined space was too tight, hindering proper deployment, and they were severely outnumbered. What transpired next was documented by Polybius, who interviewed survivors, describing it as barbaric in its sheer savagery. Many dismounted to fight on foot because there was simply insufficient room to fight from horseback. Horses became obstacles, and men slipped on corpses, engaging in hand-to-hand combat with swords and shields. Blood mingled with river water. No quarter was given. The Romans were systematically cut down. Consul Paullus fought personally, as Roman tradition demanded, attempting to rally his troops, but their position was hopeless. Accounts vary regarding the exact timing of his demise. Some claim he was killed here, in the cavalry engagement, while others suggest he died later in the main infantry battle. In any case, by the day's end, he was dead. At 11:20 a.m., just 15 minutes into the engagement, the Roman right cavalry wing had been obliterated. Perhaps 100 to 200 riders managed to escape along the river's edge, but the rest lay dead or fled in disarray. However, this moment brought forth a critical decision from Hasdrubal. An officer urged him to pursue the routed enemies. Hasdrubal declined, remembering the strategy. He ordered a regrouping. Trumpets blared, and the cavalry reformed, horses panting and men tending to minor injuries. They then embarked on a ride across the entire battlefield, traversing the distance from the river where they had just fought to the far side where another cavalry skirmish was unfolding. Meanwhile, on the Carthaginian right, facing the Roman left, a completely different strategy was implemented. Around 3,000 to 4,000 Numidian light cavalry, led by Hanno and Hannibal, confronted 4,800 allied Roman cavalry. Though slightly outnumbered, the Numidians were masters of skirmishing and evasion. Their light horses and javelins, combined with their lack of heavy armor, made them incredibly agile. Polybius accurately described their tactics. They inflicted minimal damage and sustained little themselves, yet they effectively neutralized the enemy's cavalry by constantly harassing them with charges from various directions. From 11 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., the Numidians executed their maneuvers, charging, throwing javelins, then wheeling away. As the allied cavalry gave chase, the Numidians retreated only to circle back, repeating this process continually. Their objective was clear: to keep the allied cavalry constantly engaged, preventing them from assisting the infantry, exhausting their mounts, and frustrating them into errors. This tactic proved successful. The Roman allied commander was likely fuming, cursing these elusive adversaries for not engaging in a direct fight. Yet, the Numidians adhered to their strengths, effectively keeping 4,800 Roman cavalrymen out of the main battle. At 11:30 a.m., the ground vibrated with the thunder of hooves approaching from behind. The allied cavalry looked back in alarm. Hasdrubal had arrived with 6,000 heavy cavalry, fresh from annihilating the Roman right wing. Now, they struck the allied cavalry from the rear, while the Numidians maintained pressure from the front. Instant pandemonium ensued. With enemies both in front and behind, coordination dissolved and leadership vanished, leaving each man to fend for himself. By 11:35 a.m., the Allied cavalry had fractured. Their ranks utterly collapsed, with men fleeing in every direction, discarding their weapons in a desperate attempt to escape. Hasdrubal made his second critical decision, ordering Hanno and Maharbal to pursue them relentlessly, preventing any chance of reorganization. The Numidians chased down the fleeing allies, cutting down stragglers and ensuring no regrouping could occur. Hasdrubal then reformed his heavy cavalry once more. And though men and horses were exhausted, their mission was not yet complete. A final task awaited. Observing the infantry battle, Hasdrubal noted the Romans pressing the Carthaginian center, confident of victory, oblivious to the demise of their cavalry and the impending catastrophe. Quote 88, he commanded. Quote 89, in a mere 40 minutes, Hasdrubal had achieved what many believed impossible: the destruction of cavalry forces on both flanks of an imposing army. His troops had engaged in 2 distinct battles and traversed an active combat zone under enemy observation. Now, with 6,000 heavy cavalry still capable of fighting, he was about to assault 70,000 Roman infantry from behind. But first, attention turns to the events unfolding in the center. At 11 a.m., as the cavalry engagements raged on the wings, 110,000 soldiers clashed in the heart of the battle. The Roman advance, 70,000 legionaries marching in dense formation, each man shoulder to shoulder, shields raised, swords at the ready, officers calling out the pace to the rhythmic beat of boots. Then came the initial impact. The sound, indescribable by modern standards, was chronicled by ancient historians. Shields crashing against shields, swords striking armor, war cries echoing from men, officers shouting commands, the wounded screaming, bronze clanging on bronze, iron slicing flesh. Beneath it all, a deep, grinding roar emanated from thousands locked in hand-to-hand combat. Ancient infantry warfare diverged greatly from cinematic portrayal. It was a brutal, relentless ordeal of pushing, shoving, and stabbing. The front ranks bore the brunt of the killing, while those behind relentlessly propelled them forward, over the bodies of the fallen, pushing, pushing, pushing. Hannibal's center, comprising 24,000 Gauls and Spanish soldiers, formed in a crescent shape bulging towards the Romans, absorbing the full force of 70,000 men. From the Roman viewpoint, they were successfully driving back the enemy, believing they were winning. Varro, observing from the rear, pumped his fist in elation. Quote 90, he urged. But from the Carthaginian perspective, this was all according to plan. A Gaul warrior, bleeding from a shoulder wound, slowly yielded ground. Men fell around him, yet the formation held firm. An officer's voice cut through the clamor. Quote 91, by 11:10 a.m., the crescent had inverted. What began as an arc protruding towards the Romans now curved away from them, resembling a bow being drawn back. The Romans pressed deeper, effectively marching into a trap, unaware they were being enveloped. Men from behind shoved those in front, leaving no room to halt or even to think. The Gauls and Spanish suffered terribly, incurring catastrophic casualties. 4,000 Gauls in one, 500 Spanish would perish that day. These soldiers absorbed the full force of the Roman legion, bleeding and perishing, yet holding their ground. Consider their extraordinary resilience. They weren't just resisting a frontal assault, which is formidable enough. Step felt like a profound setback. Every step felt like a profound setback. Every instinct urged them to flee or make a final stand and perish, but they chose a different path. They yielded gradually, maintaining order without breaking. While they fell, they provided crucial time for the trap to spring shut. Around 11:20 a.m., from an aerial perspective, the Roman lines had surged deep into a prominent salient. The Carthaginian center had deliberately receded into a U-shape, leaving the Roman flanks exposed. However, no Roman soldier perceived this. Their focus was entirely on the forward advance, and they were too tightly packed to observe their surroundings amidst the dust and confusion. All they knew was that they were pushing ahead, which implied victory. Or so they believed. Varro likely thought. Yet unseen, the African infantry remained concealed on the flanks, positioned in echelon formations slightly behind the bowed center. They were fresh, unengaged, observing the Romans bypass them, patiently awaiting their moment. Their commander stood impassively, watching as the Roman flanks became progressively more vulnerable. By approximately 11:25 a.m., the Roman penetration reached its zenith. The center had been pushed back over 200 yards, with Romans pouring into the emerging pocket. The formation grew increasingly constricted and dense. Men pressed, quote, 9-4, quote, barely able to wield their weapons. A Roman soldier in the vanguard suddenly grasped that something was amiss, quote 95. Then he sighted them. The African infantry on his flank, simply standing there, waiting, quote 96. At 11:26 a.m., a trumpet blared, a loud, clear signal upon which Hannibal's entire strategy hinged. The African infantry pivoted, 8,000 to 9,000 men on each side, clad in Roman armor plundered from Lake Trasimene. For a fleeting, disorienting instant, some Romans mistook them for reinforcements. Then they rotated 90 degrees, faced inwards, and advanced directly into the Roman flanks. The Roman flanks were utterly exposed, with men fighting forwards against the center, oblivious to their sides. They did not anticipate their demise until the African infantry crashed into them with renewed vigor and flawless coordination. The African left wing struck the Roman right flank, achieving complete surprise. The Romans, too tightly packed, could not turn to engage them. Simultaneously, the African right wing assailed the Roman left flank. The timing was impeccable, the execution flawless. At 11:27 a.m., pandemonium erupted through the Roman ranks. "They're on our sides! We're surrounded! Turn! Turn!" But they were unable to turn, so tightly compressed that a man could not even lift his elbows. Men behind continued to press forward, oblivious to the unfolding disaster at the front. Coordination vanished, and the formation dissolved into a chaotic horde. The Romans now faced combat on three fronts: the Gauls and Spanish at the front, who had ceased their retreat and held firm; the African heavy infantry on the right flank; and the African heavy infantry on the left flank. And they still hadn't encountered the worst of it. The cavalry was approaching. By 11:40 a.m., full encirclement was achieved. Hasdrubal's cavalry, after a brief rest and realignment, now charged from the rear. The Roman rearguards heard the thunder of hooves, turned, and beheld 6,000 cavalry bearing down upon them. There was no time to form a defensive square, no pikes, no proper defenses, only swords and shields against mounted, armored cavalry attacking from an elevated position. Cavalry typically struggles against properly formed infantry walls of shields and spears, as horses seldom charge into such an obstacle. However, these Romans were not in formation. They were a tightly packed mob, unable to maneuver or establish a defensive line. Consequently, the cavalry simply rode into them, horsemen stabbing downwards with spears and slashing with swords from above. The Romans attempted to resist, but the crowd was too dense. They couldn't properly swing their weapons. The Romans were now encircled on all four sides, the Gauls and Spanish at the front, no longer retreating, African heavy infantry on the right flank, African heavy infantry on the left flank, and Hasdrubal's heavy cavalry at the rear. Every escape route was blocked. There were no breaks in the enemy lines, no friendly cavalry to rescue them, no hope remaining. From an aerial perspective, the formation appeared as a shrinking oval of Romans, encircled by a tightening Carthaginian ring. Roman command collapsed. Varro, positioned at the rear with a small cavalry escort, witnessed the catastrophe unfolding. The formation was disintegrating, men perishing by the hundreds every minute. He could not transmit orders due to the overwhelming noise, dust, and chaos. He made a desperate decision, shouting to his escort, "Retreat back to the camps." But there was no way to communicate this to the 70,000 men. They couldn't hear. The order never reached the front ranks. Varro, with his remaining 70 cavalrymen, rode away from the battlefield, escaping north. Historians have debated his actions for centuries. Was he a coward? Perhaps. What alternative did he truly have? To remain and face certain death? He held the esteemed position as one of Rome's 2 elected leaders. The other was already deceased. His paramount duty was self-preservation, to return and recount the events, enabling the Republic to formulate a response. Thus, he fled, abandoning his forces, and forever carried the weight of that disgrace. Within the confines of the encirclement, the soldiers endured unimaginable torment. According to later interviews with survivors, a Roman legionary could barely discern objects beyond 5 feet due to the omnipresent dust. The men were packed so tightly that a wounded soldier couldn't even fall. When the person directly in front of him succumbed, pierced through the throat by a Carthaginian spear, the body didn't topple, but remained upright, supported by the crushing density of bodies, its lifeless eyes staring, blood trickling onto the legionary's sandals. The pressure intensified. Principles of physics and geometry conspired against them. 70,000 men were compressed into an ever-shrinking space. Those on the outer fringes were being slain, while the inner ranks were squeezed together. Men were literally being crushed. Some met their end through suffocation before being fatally stabbed, unable to draw breath amid the throng of sweating, dying bodies. Livy, the Roman historian who compiled survivor accounts, documented harrowing details. Men were positioned so closely that many found themselves unable to raise their arms to defend themselves. The combination of heat, dust, and dense bodies meant suffocation claimed lives before lethal wounds could. Some desperately attempted to dig into the ground to evade the blades. Certain units made efforts to break through the encirclement. Around midday, desperate charges were initiated, forming wedges to assault the enemy lines in an attempt to breach them. A handful succeeded, perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 men managing to escape in small groups. Most were cut down by Numidian cavalry as they fled. Roughly 1,000 eventually reached the Roman camps, located 2 kilometers away. However, the main army had no avenue of escape, no room to charge, no space to organize. They simply perished where they stood. At 12:15 p.m., the Carthaginians advanced from all directions, systematically taking turns. The front ranks engaged until exhaustion, then withdrew, replaced by fresh troops. This relentless cycle continued. The Romans, in stark contrast, received no such relief. They simply continued to die, endlessly. This was no longer a battle. Battles involved tactics, maneuvers, and strategy. This was an unadulterated massacre, an industrial-scale annihilation, which would persist for 2 more hours, from noon until 2 p.m., the 2 longest hours in Roman history. The Romans couldn't coordinate, couldn't discern their leaders, as most officers were already deceased. They couldn't hear orders amidst the incessant screams. It reverted to individual struggles for survival within a throng of thousands, all meeting their end together. The Carthaginians displayed patience and discipline, killing from the perimeter inward. They allowed the Romans to exhaust themselves in futile resistance, then moved in for the final destruction. Let's consider the figures for a moment. 2 hours equate to 120 minutes. 50,000 Romans perished during that period. That translates to 416 men per minute, or 7 men every second. Let me count with you. 1 1,000, 7 dead. 2 1,000, 7 more dead. 3 1,000, another 7 gone, for 2 unyielding hours every single second. Individual narratives emerge from historical accounts. A former senator, fighting in the ranks, as was customary for Roman nobles, was encircled by his bodyguards, who fell one by one, protecting him. He finally succumbed, defending his companions to the last. 80 senators would perish that day. A seasoned veteran who had survived Trebia and Lake Trasimene recognized the unprecedented nature of this conflict. He attempted to organize a defense, keeping men fighting, but was ultimately overwhelmed, dying on his feet. A 19-year-old recruit in his inaugural battle, having enlisted just 3 months prior, never truly engaged in combat. He was simply propelled forward from behind until he was killed from the side, perishing bewildered, unable to comprehend his fate. By 1 p.m., those still alive faced profound horror. Livy documented cases of men discovered with severed legs and tendons, unable to flee, imploring their enemies for a swift death. Others had clawed holes in the earth with their bare hands, burying their faces to self-suffocate rather than confront the swords. Men were found standing upright, dead, sustained by the surrounding bodies. Some attempted to surrender, casting down their weapons, raising their hands, and pleading for mercy. Early in the engagement, Carthaginians took prisoners, valuable for ransom. Yet, as the bloodshed escalated, there were too many Romans to guard them all, and the fighting was too intense. They simply killed everyone. By 1:30 p.m., virtually no quarter was being granted. 2 kilometers away, the Roman camps housed 10,000 men who had not participated in the battle. The camp guards observed the unfolding catastrophe, heard the screams, saw the dust clouds, and knew their army was perishing. They debated, quote, 99, quote. They remained within the camps, in fortified positions, hoping the Carthaginians would be too exhausted to attack. They would surrender the following day. At 2 p.m., the sounds receded. The fighting ceased. The Carthaginians were spent. The Romans were either dead or captured. The ensuing silence, after hours of relentless screaming, was profoundly unsettling and unnatural. The plains of Cannae appeared to be hell made manifest. Bodies lay in such dense piles that the ground was obscured. Blood saturated the earth, transforming the dust into a reddish-black mud. Weapons lay scattered everywhere, alongside broken shields and discarded armor. The stench arising from 50,000 decaying bodies under the August sun was truly beyond description. Survivors recounted being able to detect the putrid odor from miles away, a grotesque blend of death, blood, entrails, perspiration, and terror. Regarding the final tally of Roman casualties, accounts differ. Polybius, who interviewed individuals from both sides, reported 70,000 fatalities. Livy recorded 48,200 deaths. Contemporary historians estimate between 50,000 and 60,000 perished, with an additional 10,000 to 20,000 taken captive. Only 14,000 to 15,000 managed to escape, primarily camp guards who hadn't participated in the fighting. Out of the 86,400 men who deployed that fateful morning, roughly 70% became casualties. The Roman leadership was severely depleted. One consul lay dead, and the consuls from the previous 2 years had also fallen. 2 quaestors were killed, as were 29 out of 48 military tribunes. A staggering 80 senators perished, representing 25% to 30% of the entire Roman Senate wiped out in a single afternoon. Over 200 equestrians, members of the knightly class, also met their end. Carthaginian losses, in contrast, were much lower. Polybius cited 5,700 dead, while Livy reported 8,000. These were predominantly Gauls, 4,000, and Spanish, 1,500, positioned in the center, who bore the brunt of the Roman offensive. The light cavalry and African infantry experienced minimal losses, having executed their roles flawlessly. As one military historian later observed, Cannae witnessed more men killed in the single afternoon than the United States lost in the entire Vietnam War. It was the second deadliest day in Western military history, surpassed only by the first day of the Somme in 1916, and it was accomplished by a smaller army using only swords and spears. At 3 p.m., Hannibal surveyed the battlefield, checking on his troops and observing the fallen Romans. Officers approached him proclaiming, "Lord, it is done. The Romans are annihilated." Hannibal remained silent for a moment, then spoke, 48,200. When asked what he meant, he clarified, "That's how many senators, magistrates, officers, and legionaries we killed today. 48,200 Romans. Rome likely has a total of 200,000 military-age men. Today, we eliminated a quarter of them. After a long pause, an officer ventured the obvious question, "Then we have won the war?" Hannibal gazed north towards Rome, 300 miles distant, and replied, "We'll see." By the evening of August 2nd, the survivors huddled in the Roman camps. 14,000 escapees, mostly camp guards, and a few thousand who had fought their way out. Varro, accompanied by 70 cavalrymen, was among them. Everyone was in shock. The wounded screamed, men wept, and officers desperately tried to restore order amidst the debate of whether to stay or flee. Varro asserted command as the sole surviving consul, regardless of personal respect. "We fortify," he declared. "Tomorrow, we will negotiate the surrender of the camps, but tonight, we dispatch riders to Rome." At midnight, a small cavalry detachment departed, galloping north through the darkness, switching horses at relay stations. The 200-mile journey to Rome would demand over 30 hours of arduous riding. Behind them, the camps nervously awaited their fate. Outside, in Hannibal's camp, a subdued celebration unfolded. Though victory wine was distributed, the men were too exhausted to fully rejoice, many grappling with their own losses. Then came the legendary discussion. Hannibal, the cavalry commander who had led the Numidians, approached Hannibal, filled with energy and sensing an immense opportunity. Quote 108, he urged. Quote 109, Hannibal considered his words, glancing at his weary troops and the wounded, mentally calculating distances, logistics, and the harsh realities. Quote 110, he stated. Hannibal was stunned. Quote 111, Hannibal explained. Quote 112, Hannibal then looked directly at Hannibal, adding, quote 113, quote, Hannibal's bitter reply became one of history's most renowned quotes, recorded by multiple sources. Quote 114, quote, for 2 millennia, historians have debated this decision. Should Hannibal have advanced on Rome immediately? Some argue yes, believing the psychological impact alone might have forced a capitulation. Others contend no, citing Rome's impregnable walls without siege machinery and the impracticality of an unsupported siege. We will never know for certain, but we do know what transpired instead. On the morning of August 3rd, the Roman camp surrendered. 10,000 Roman soldiers were taken prisoner. Hannibal, adhering to standard practice, offered to ransom them and dispatched an ambassador to Rome with his terms. Hannibal's strategy was to trigger a domino effect. Allied cities would defect, southern Italy would abandon Rome, isolating the capital, and then he would negotiate peace from a position of strength. His plan began to materialize. The first defections occurred in August and September. Capua, Italy's second-largest city, aligned with Carthage. Numerous cities in Apulia switched allegiances, and Lucania and Bruttium followed suit. In Sicily, Syracuse's allegiance shifted after its king's death. Even Macedon, across the Adriatic, signed an alliance with Hannibal. Hannibal was confident, quote, 115, quote. Yet, an urgent messenger was speeding northward, and his arrival in Rome marked a turning point. It was dawn on August 4th. Rome, a metropolis of roughly 400,000 citizens, was awakening. A typical day was anticipated, markets opening, individuals engaged in their work, families sharing breakfast. Suddenly, the rapid thud of horse hooves echoed through the streets, scattering pedestrians. The rider, caked in dust and visibly exhausted, was making a direct path to the Senate House. Quote, 116, he demanded. Informed they weren't in session, he insisted, summon them for a meeting. Within the hour, the emergency Senate session commenced. Senators hurried into the building as unsettling rumors spread throughout the city. Something significant has occurred, something terrible. The praetor, a senior magistrate, began reading the dispatched message. A profound silence fell over the chamber. Consuls Paullus and Varro engaged Hannibal's forces near Cannae on August 2nd. Murmurs rippled through the room. The battle has been lost. The murmurs grew louder. Consul Paullus is confirmed deceased. 8 legions annihilated, casualties are estimated. His voice wavered, his hand visibly shaking, between 50,000 and 70,000 men. Chaos erupted. Senators were shouting, some openly weeping, while others vehemently denied the news. Impossible! They mustered 86,000 troops. How could this happen? The praetor pressed on, his voice cutting through the din. Consul Varro survived and is currently attempting to rally survivors near Canusium. Hannibal's exact whereabouts are unknown. The immediate threat to Rome is also undetermined. Pandemonium ensued. He could be marching on us now. We have no military, we are defenseless. Within hours, the grim tidings swept across the city, plunging the streets into a cacophony of wailing and screams. Families learned of the deaths of their sons, fathers, and brothers. Women rushed to the temples, offering sacrifices, prayers, and tributes to every deity they could name. It's crucial to grasp the immensity of this tragedy. Every single family in Rome suffered a loss. Not just many or most, but every Roman household mourned a father, a son, a brother, a cousin, or a friend. A staggering 20% of all military-aged Roman men perished in a single day. Imagine a contemporary nation enduring the loss of 10 million soldiers in one afternoon. Such was the equivalent devastation. The city descended into profound panic. Riots seemed imminent. Citizens demanded protection. Quote 126. Religious hysteria gripped the populace. They consulted the Sibylline books, ancient prophetic texts housed in the temple. A delegation was dispatched to the oracle at Delphi in Greece. Hundreds of animals were sacrificed. Then, Rome resorted to an act they rarely, if ever, performed, an act that underscored the depth of their terror. Human sacrifice. 4 individuals, 2 Gauls and 2 Greeks, were buried alive in an attempt to appease the gods, a desperate, archaic ritual. At this critical juncture, Quintus Fabius Maximus emerged. The man they had once derided as a quote 127, the one they had ridiculed, was now justified by the catastrophe. Yet Fabius harbored no sense of triumph. He assumed command, convening an emergency Senate session and personally navigating the streets, projecting an image of composure and confidence. His directives were explicit. Firstly, order must be re-established. Guards were stationed at all city gates. No one was permitted to leave without authorization. Quote 128. Quote, secondly, mourning must be controlled. Public grieving was restricted to 30 days, after which ceremonies were to be private. Quote 129. Thirdly, practical measures were paramount. Quote 130. The Senate protested. Quote 131. Quote 132. Fabius retorted. Quote 133. Rome shattered all precedent. The draft age was lowered to 16. Slaves were enlisted, promised freedom upon completion of service. Prisoners were released if they agreed to fight. Elderly veterans, long past retirement, were called back into service. Everyone was armed. Within a month, 4 new legions, 20,000 men, poorly trained and desperate, yet armed and resolute, were assembled. Then came the pivotal choice. When Hannibal's envoy arrived, presenting peace terms that were ostensibly reasonable, including the release of prisoners for ransom, implying the war could conclude, the Senate deliberated. One faction argued, quote, 134, quote. The opposing side countered, quote, 135, quote. The vote was decisive. The formal rejection was delivered. To add further insult, they declared, this refusal, this unwavering pride, this absolute tenacity, ultimately preserved Rome. Hannibal's entire strategy hinged on Rome conceding, on them recognizing the immense cost and entering negotiations. He failed to comprehend that Romans would rather meet their end than acknowledge defeat. Hannibal remained in southern Italy, victorious yet static. Allies were defecting to his cause, and he held sway over southern Italy. Nonetheless, Rome refused to negotiate and was actively raising new forces. The strategic dilemma was stark. Either march on Rome, a 300-mile journey through hostile territory, against a fortified city that would necessitate extensive siege equipment and months, if not years, to conquer, all without reinforcements from Carthage, or await Rome's collapse. He reasoned that more cities would defect, economic pressure would mount, and eventually Rome would become isolated, forcing them to the negotiating table. Hannibal opted to wait. We have decimated their army, now we will dismantle their will. Yet he gravely underestimated Roman fortitude. Between August and December of 216 BC, an astonishing feat was achieved by Rome. 4 legions were spontaneously raised, all allied cities were reinforced, all proposals for negotiation were rejected, and the fight continued unabated. The renowned Fabian strategy was reactivated, marking a new approach for Rome to avoid direct confrontations. Instead, numerous smaller military units were deployed to persistently harass Hannibal, disrupting his supply routes in a war of attrition. Hannibal then grasped a terrible reality. He could win every engagement, yet ultimately lose the larger conflict. For 13 years, stretching from 215 to 203 BC, Hannibal remained on Italian soil, securing various tactical victories. Yet Rome consistently regenerated its forces. He found himself unable to instigate a decisive final battle or capture Rome itself. Insufficient reinforcements from Carthage also plagued him, as Carthage was simultaneously engaged in conflicts across Spain, Sicily, and other regions. The pivotal moment arrived in 207 BC when Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal, advanced from Spain with 30,000 additional troops, promising crucial aid. However, Roman forces intercepted him at the Metaurus River, annihilating his army and killing Hasdrubal. His severed head was then dispatched to Hannibal's encampment as a grim message. Upon seeing his brother's head, Hannibal reportedly declared, quote, 140, quote. Meanwhile, a burgeoning Roman commander, Publius Cornelius Scipio, who had survived Cannae as a junior officer, assimilated Hannibal's strategies. By 206 BC, he had conquered Spain and embarked on an audacious plan. In 204 BC, Scipio launched an invasion of Africa, striking at Carthage's home territory, employing Hannibal's own tactics against them. Carthage was thrown into disarray, leading to Hannibal's recall after 15 years in Italy, bringing him back to defend the capital. The Battle of Zama ensued in 202 BC, pitting Hannibal against Scipio. This time, Hannibal possessed an inferior cavalry, and Scipio masterfully utilized Hannibal's signature tactics, resulting in a decisive defeat for the Carthaginians and the conclusion of the war. Hannibal's legendary words to Scipio after the engagement were, "Today, a general greater than I has emerged victorious." The ensuing peace terms were exceptionally harsh. Carthage forfeited all its overseas holdings, was burdened with immense indemnities, and its navy was eradicated, permitted only 10 vessels. Furthermore, it was forbidden to wage war without Roman authorization, effectively becoming a client state of Rome. 50 years later, the Third Punic War, from 149 to 146 BC, saw Rome utterly demolish Carthage. The city was razed and its inhabitants enslaved. Legend has it that the Romans even scattered salt upon the earth to prevent anything from ever growing there again. The repercussions of Cannae reverberate through history, with every military academy globally still scrutinizing it. It stands as the quintessential battle of annihilation. The German General Staff in World War I modeled their strategy on it. The Schlieffen Plan essentially sought to replicate Cannae on an immense scale. A double envelopment, an encirclement, and the complete destruction of the enemy's forces in a single decisive strike. Rome itself underwent reforms due to Cannae, restructuring its legions into the more adaptable cohort system, enhancing its cavalry and refining officer training, never again rotating command between 2 consuls. Yet herein lies the profound paradox of this narrative. Hannibal secured the perfect victory, arguably the greatest tactical triumph in military annals, causing more Roman casualties in one day than any other battle. And still, he lost the war. This underscores that tactics differ from strategy. Battles are not wars. Eradicating an army doesn't extinguish a nation's resolve. Rome absorbed a crucial lesson at Cannae that rendered it indomitable. One can endure defeat in every skirmish and yet emerge victorious in the ultimate conflict. Catastrophic setbacks can lead to greater strength. Triumph is not attained through one flawless day, but through an unwavering refusal to yield, even after the most devastating one. 22 centuries later, Cannae is remembered for its perfection, a masterful display of military brilliance executed with precision. However, it ought to be commemorated for a different reason. 50,000 individuals perished on a dusty plain in southern Italy. Their demise was a consequence of arrogance, overconfidence, and incompetent leadership. They perished in a trap they willingly entered. But their city, their republic, rejected the notion that their sacrifices would be in vain. Rome did not capitulate, did not negotiate, did not surrender. They absorbed a blow that should have annihilated them and resurfaced to conquer the world. Hannibal won the Battle of Cannae. Rome won everything else. This is why, 2 millennia later, we employ Latin-derived languages, abide by Roman law, delve into Roman history, and scarcely recollect Carthage at all. If this account captivated you as much as it did me during my research, please subscribe. Military history is rife with such pivotal moments, where the balance hangs precariously and a single decision alters the trajectory of civilization. I will continue to present these significant stories, recounted in the manner they warrant. Thank you for watching. Now, I urge you to explore further into Rome's history. Believe me, the exploration is extensive and truly rewarding.